Hey, what's up everybody? Gareth here, FCP Euro. Welcome back to their DIY. Have a really special one here today. We're going to be installing an AST 5100 series kit on this 2011 M3 Coupe behind us. Of course, that's the E92. This process is going to be the same for any E92, E90, or E93 M3. Of course, this kit is specific for the M3s, particularly because of the rear shocks. However, if you're watching this DIY for just general suspension installation on the E90 chassis or even the E80 chassis, this is all going to relatively be close to the same process. We've been working a lot more closely with our friends at Turn 14 Distribution in order to bring in brands like this to our catalog. AST is a brand that they carry, so we're very excited to install this today on this E92 M3. Of course, with a vehicle like the E92 M3, if you really want to make an improvement on the way that the car feels and handles, you're going to have to look at probably something like this. Your standard, generic coilovers are probably not going to give you the type of performance, feel, feedback, etc. That's something like this is going to be able to provide. This kit specifically has the optional camber plates. It comes with the adjustable front sway bar links, and it also comes with PowerFlex rear shock mounts with the kit. We're of course going to be installing this with new OEM hardware where required. But overall, we're looking forward to this installation and of course what it's going to be like afterwards. Aside from that, let's talk about some of the tools we're going to need to do this job, and then we'll go ahead and jump right into it. So the tools we're going to need for this job, pretty much just a variety of different sizes: 7mm Allen, 6mm Allen, a 5mm Allen, 10mm socket, a 13mm socket, 16mm, 18mm, and 21mm. Also have the wrenches in the same corresponding sizes. Along with that, a variety of ratchets, torque wrench that could do at least 165 Nm of torque, probably a pry bar, you might want a hammer. Definitely other products like anti-seize for lubricating the adjustable sway bar links, brushes, or any kind of abrasive in order to clean out the knuckles, because once you remove the strut, there's going to be quite a bit of corrosion in there. It's all aluminum, so that's just going to happen. But other than that, this is just the basic assortment of tools you're going to need to do the job. Along with that, obviously you're going to want the other safety equipment like proper jack stands and a good jack to get the car up in the air, and obviously make sure you're working on a level ground. But now we've gone through that, let's go ahead and jump right into the job and we'll show you how to get this done. First thing we're going to do, obviously, we're going to move the wheel. We're going to start on the front of the car, and then we're going to work our way towards the rear. First thing we're going to do is open up our little electrical box here, and we're going to disconnect our wheel speed sensor along with our brake pad wear sensor. Reason being is we need to drop this whole assembly down and out, and we don't want to put any tension on these cables, so it is very easy to come in here and disconnect them. Very clearly, these are the original struts on the car, so still factory. We're going to remove the dust caps for our brake caliper. We're going to remove the guide pins. That'll allow us to take the caliper out of the way, hang it out of position, and then we'll go from there. We're going to remove our caliper guide pins. They're both 7mm drive, 7mm Allen. Before I finish pulling those pins out, I'm going to go ahead and remove the anti-rattle clip. All you got to do is just stick a screwdriver in here. Actually, no, I'm sorry. All you have to do is stick a screwdriver in here, push the entire thing forward, and the clip comes off just like that. It's important to take a note that the lower guide pin is longer than the top. It's a short guide pin top, long guide pin bottom. Both are the same drive size, but the lengths are different. While I'm down below here, I'm going to go ahead and remove our sway bar link from the sway bar. The AST kit came with its own sway bar links, and I think it's worth noting that when you install coilovers or buy coilovers for these cars, you need to figure out what type of sway bar link you need. Some of the upper mounts on the shock body are going to be flat. The factory sway bar links on the M3s are a ball seat, so would not be backward compatible. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove it from the sway bar itself, since the sway bar is staying in the car for now. What size is it? Counter hold is going to be 17mm on the actual stud, and then it's a 16mm nut. I'm going to pull out the brake hose on this retainer, and then from here I'll be able to slide the whole caliper forward, and I'm going to hang it off the subframe. What we're going to do is when we're going to unbolt the whole strut assembly from the car, I'm going to pull the whole thing down and out, so I don't want to put any pressure on that hose. On your factory calipers, depending on how thick the pads are, the caliper actually might be inset of the bracket, so it might look something like that. You might have to push the piston back in slightly to get the caliper to come off the carrier. Just be aware of that. With the caliper off, I'm just going to go ahead and hang it here on the subframe I'm going to find a place where it's going to be secured and just make sure that there's no pressure on the hose. Perfect. So now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and lower the car back down. We're going to go back up to the top strut tower, remove the nuts at the top strut mount, and then we can start the process of lowering this down and out. Now we're back up top here in the engine bay. Here, M3s come with this factory strut brace. So there's a little cap here. I'm just going to come in here with a flathead screwdriver and release the cap, being careful not to mar any of the paint here on that piece. These nuts are 13 millimeter. Important to know, on the factory M3 strut brace, these nuts are very specific to this application because they actually sit down inside of this piece here. You don't have to worry about unbolting the strut brace or anything. It's not going to go anywhere even once you remove this. Now before I lower this down, I do want to make one thing clear. On the M3s, your wishbone, which is the straight control arm, has a monoball factory on the inside, so you don't need to loosen any bolts at the bushings. The factory M3 forward control arm or thrust rod or tension strut normally does have a rubber bushing, so you wouldn't need to loosen that bolt. However, this has a Synchro Design Works spherical thrust arm in the front. Don't need to loosen that bolt either because it's going to pivot down on its own. So you don't need to loosen any of these bolts if you have those types of parts installed. And now we're going to be very careful as we bring this whole assembly out. Make sure that the studs don't hit anything. Make sure that everything is loose and free, which it is here. And now we can raise the car back up so we can work on it. But as you can see, like I said, the entire suspension is spherical, so everything moves freely. If you had rubber bushings here, E90, normal non-M3 control arms, or if you didn't have a spherical in the front, you would have to loosen those bolts at minimum in order to get this articulation. So we're going to remove our pinch bolt first. It's going to be a 16 millimeter nut and a 16 millimeter bolt. We're going to have to keep note of that retainer, but we're going to put it off to the side for now. Using a spindle spreader tool. This is the BMW factory one. And all it's going to do is just gently open up this pinch so we get enough room to get the strut out. So now we have the spindle spread. We have a aluminum strut with an aluminum knuckle. There's probably going to be some corrosion in there, so it might be difficult to remove. Might need a little bit of persuasion, dead blow hammer to the bottom. But this one for us is coming right out, but you can actually see kind of the buildup on this. We're also going to come in here and clean that knuckle out, get that corrosion out before we install the AST strut assembly. I'm using a Scotch-Brite pad to come in here and remove some of this corrosion on the surface. Again, this is just so that the new assembly will slide into place and not jam up while it's going in. You'll be amazed by the amount of corrosion that'll be in here. I'd say avoid any heavy wire wheels or anything like that, because this being aluminum, you could remove enough material that you actually change the sizing of this, so you don't want to do that. You can just see the amount of stuff that's flaking off out of there. So here's our right strut assembly. These are directional from the factory. The AST assemblies are not directional. What we're using as a reference here is we have our sway bar link mount, which is physically part of the strut from the factory. On here, this mount is actually independent, so you can change preload on the sway bar. What I'm trying to do here is we have this line right here. I'm using that as our alignment mark for the new strut into the vehicle, or for the AST assembly in the vehicle. I want to line up the opening in the knuckle with this opening here. So we have this dowel here. I'm using the offset portion. So when you look at these adjustable sway bar mounts, they're not straight down the middle. I'm using the portion that's more offset as the mount for the sway bar link to basically mimic and replicate how it is from the factory. One thing to note, we have adjustable sway bar links with the setup. That's going to be something you're going to need. But you can tell that there's some definite differences here. So I'm going to use this as our alignment mark, and I'm setting the offset on the sway bar mount so that I can mount the sway bar link later. All right, we're going to go ahead and install the new assembly, lining up that opening on that pressed fit sleeve so that it is in alignment with our opening here on the knuckle. Now I remove the spreader, and our knuckle's actually gone back to being mostly a press fit. However, I do need to reinstall our pinch bolt in. We're going to be putting a new one in place. We're going to reinstall our hose and cable bracket. Want to do this before you put the bolt through. Remember, it's a new bolt that's going back through now, along with a new lock nut. And we're also going to go ahead and torque this while we have access to it, easy access. 16 and 16. I'm not going to tighten this with the impact. I'm just going to go ahead and bring it down. Like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my torque wrench and we'll torque that to the recommended setting. Torque spec on our M3 here. It's going to be 45 Newton meters of torque for the pinch bolt. I have the jack located back under the wishbone to support the weight, and now I'm just going to go ahead and push the assembly back up into position. I'm going to be using the OE hardware for this instead of the ones provided by AST. The ones from AST are fine, but because this has the factory strut brace on it, and I was talking about these nuts earlier, I want to make sure that everything aligns back up properly and the strut brace is supported properly. So the thread is the exact same size as an M8, so no harm in doing this. I just prefer the factory hardware for this application. And also, you know, if you had a regular E92 and you were using the M3 strut brace, I think this would apply to you as well. And another thing that's noteworthy here is we do have camber plates. So I'm going to set the camber on these a little bit later, so I'm not really going to worry about torquing these all the way down. Obviously, when you're installing any kind of suspension component, particularly with new springs, which is what I have here with these coilovers, it's going to take a little bit for the ride height to sort of settle in place. So outside of just kind of setting a ride height on these and getting them to within the ballpark of where I want, it's going to take a little bit while before we can really do a proper alignment on this. All right, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the brake caliper. If you remember earlier, the long guide pin goes on the bottom. I went ahead and cleaned these with some Scotch-Brite. I always try to get guide pins started by hand first. Number one feeling for them to drop into the hole like that one just did there. I haven't quite felt this bottom one yet, but I think we're there. I think it kind of goes without saying that in this case we did have to depress our brake caliper slightly. You're going to want to pump the brakes before you start driving. Torque spec on these guide pin screws is 30 Newton meters, and again 7mm drive. You could also choose to do this by hand, that'd be perfectly fine as well, but the key is really to make sure they're just not over torqued.
Middle higher. Around these wires back up.
I went ahead and put the dust caps back on. They just clip in place. If you're missing them, really recommend replacing them. That just prevents moisture and debris and stuff from getting inside those guide boots. And now it's really just a matter of rerouting our cables back to position. You'll see on these from the factory they have little mounting points, so you can use that as a reference to where you need to run it. I found that this brake hose was a little stubborn to go back in, so I'm going to use some brake fluid or brake parts cleaner as temporary lube. It's a good trick. Learned that from the best. The assembly is installed on this side for the time being. Like I said, we're going to have to go ahead and adjust our sway bar link to the correct height, make sure there's no preload on the sway bar. We're also going to have to check ride height and all that kind of stuff. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and install the other corner, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the rear. All right, went ahead and threw our anti-rattle clip back in on the caliper, and that's it. Obviously, we still have other corners to do. I still got to do the other side. I also have to do the rear, but I do want to take a moment to talk about what the difference is, primarily on the AST setup versus our factory setup. The factory setup is a low pressure twin tube, which is really, really good for ride comfort, but it's not necessarily great for performance. What we have here is an inverted monotube, so these are 44.5mm. Normally, this thick portion you see right here, this would actually be inside the shock body on a non-inverted setup. But by inverting it, particularly on a McPherson Strut suspension, the biggest weakness the McPherson Strut style suspension has is the strut is literally part of the steering system of the car. So that whole thing has to rotate. And when you load that up on a non-inverted monotube setup, the actual piston shaft will flex in relation to the shock body itself. So you get a little bit of deflection. It's not great for that type of setup. So having this be a large inverted monotube, you're not going to have that flex independently between the shock shaft and the shock body itself. Along with that, the actual piston shaft, which is connected underneath, that's a 14mm diameter piston shaft, so it's pretty large itself. So essentially on this setup, you're not going to have deflection on the shock body. Another thing to note here, you know, is we have a smaller spring here and a larger spring here. This is actually a tender spring, not a helper spring. So this has its own spring rate and this has its own spring rate. So what's going to happen is this essentially ends up being a 2 spring rate style setup. So you'll compress this before you start compressing this. So the nice thing with that setup is instead of it being a standard fixed spring rate through the entire travel, you actually have varied spring rates through. Along with that, these have a 10-way rebound adjustment setup. So damping adjustment, not dampening adjustment, I want to throw that out there. But it's a 10-way adjustment. Rebound adjustment is specifically the amount of resistive force that the damper can provide against the spring rebound. So most of your adjustments that you're going to feel primarily are going to be on the rebound side, not necessarily so much on the compression side. Compression is going to be the resistive force of the damper against the spring. In this case, it's the opposite. So on a 10-way setup, I'm actually going to start the fronts at 6 out of 10, and we're going to work our way from there. But what's nice about this setup is being a 10-way adjustment, each one is going to have a nice discernible feel difference. I don't think you're going to want to start too low on the front. You're probably going to be 6, maybe 7 tops. If you go to the track, maybe bump it up to an 8. But along with that, you also have the camber plate up top, which is optional on this kit. That's going to allow you to dial in some front camber, which is going to give you the most amount of tread contact with the road surface. Particularly if you're using this car on track, you want to run a little bit more camber than you would on the street to prevent excessive tire wear on the outside edges. But you have a lot of adjustment built into this system. Spring rate's already pre-chosen. It's ready to install as a complete unit, and being a 10-way rebound adjustment setup, you're going to have a little bit of tunability depending on how you're using the setup, so you're getting a lot out of the package. Now we're coming here to the rear. We're going to go ahead and remove our wheel first, 17mm. So yeah, 17mm to remove those lug nuts. Obviously we have a stud conversion here, Motorsport hardware. Makes obviously wheel removal and installation a lot easier instead of the lug bolts. Obviously the lug nut size might vary, like if you have MSI studs, maybe you have 19mm nuts, just throwing that out there. But in this case, what we have here is our shock on the outside, spring on the inside. We're going to unbolt the shock from the camber arm below, and we have another bolt on the outside we're going to have to undo to let the camber arm swing down enough to get the spring out. And then from there, we're going to have to go to inside the vehicle to physically remove the top shock mount nut. So I'm gonna go ahead and lift the car back up. We're gonna do everything underneath first, and then we're gonna go work on the car. So we're gonna go ahead and unbolt our shock absorber from our camber strut right here, camber link, whatever you'd like to call it, 18mm bolt, and then we also have it bolted here to our knuckle with a 21mm bolt. I'm gonna go ahead and do the shock first. Yeah, these bolts have Loctite applied from the factory. Yeah, normally I've actually been able to take axle nuts off with this gun, so obviously this thing is in there pretty good. All right, next up we're gonna go ahead and remove our camber link here from the knuckle, 21mm. Yeah. We're gonna go ahead and pull our spring out. We can do that now. So now we're in the trunk of the car. All of our shock towers are gonna be behind all of this trunk lining stuff, so we gotta go ahead and remove all of that. I'm actually gonna start by removing our entire trunk liner here all together, just to make life easy. Next, I'm gonna remove this piece here. And from here, we got a bunch of pop rivets that hold the rest of this in place. So we got one over there, we got a bunch over here, and we just need to remove those until we can go ahead and pull this out of the way. And lastly, we got a T40 back here that kind of holds this cargo hook in place. Got to get that out of the way as well. So with all of that stuff removed, we should just be able to pull this out. And there's our shock mount. Obviously, this car, or not obviously, depending on how much you know about these, This is a non-EDC car. Obviously, there's no electrical connectors on top of the shocks or struts. So everything here is plug and play. I don't have to worry about coding anything out. Also, these sizes here are going to be different because it's a non-EDC shock. So it's going to be a 7mm stud if I recall correctly. And I believe it's an 18mm nut. Now we're just going to go ahead and drop compressor shock a little bit. And snake it out. And we're also going to pull down what's left of the lower shock mount there. It's kind of stuck in the body of the car. We're not going to be reusing it, so we don't need it. There we go. Our next thing is to get the spring installed. A couple things to note. Our spring adjuster, which is right here, is going to sit up here at the top of the body. And the spring shim down here, which sits on the arm, I'm going to go ahead and replace this, just kind of as a good, I mean, you can see it's kind of nasty looking, so I'm going to replace it at the same time. But to take out this upper spring seat, all we're going to do is grab it and pull it out. So it's removable on the E90 chassis. And then our spring seat adjuster is going to sit here up at the top. Here's our coil spring. This is the new lower coil spring shim or spring isolator. I'm going to go ahead and pre-install this. So you want it so that the spring is sitting like that, where it's butted up against. You have this semicircular locating tab here that's going to line in this hole there. And then I'm going to take our spring adjuster, put it on our spring stack like this. You can see where I have it currently set for height adjustment. We'll give you measurements on the setup. And then really from this point, I'm just going to go ahead and install this entire assembly into the car. Want to make sure that that locating tab comes through here like so, and then we can push down on the control arm to put it into place like that. So super simple. Just make sure that that spring adjuster sits up at the top against the body. That's where it needs to be. If you were to install it upside down, because you can do that, you would not have enough adjustment, and the rear would actually sit very high. So that needs to sit up against the body like that. All right, now we're going to assemble our shock. You can see we have a little bit of a taper here on the shock shaft. We have this little sleeve that we need to install that's going to actually support the weight of the shock. So that can only go in one way. See how that sits nicely? If we put it this way, it just sits above that. So that's a tapered fit right there. This is the lower portion of our upper shock mount. That washer goes there, which is going to support the entire assembly like so. I'm going to slide that into position, and then we're going to hold on to these parts for installation in the car. Our counter hold's going to be 9mm there, and then the new nut is going to be 18mm. When you receive these from AST, the damping adjustment knob might be pre-installed. They give you the little Allen key to remove it. You need to remove that. Don't try to remove the adjuster. That needs to stay in place. Just remove the knob. It's held in with a set screw, easy enough. We're probably going to have to use a jack here to push it up into position, but at the very least I can run the new bolt through. We're going to install our new bolt. We're not going to torque this yet. This needs to be done at ride height with load on the suspension because this has a rubber bushing on it. Other thing I've been noticing here, sometimes on these control arms this bolt will thread in a little tight. I like to put just a little bit of engine oil on the pilot here. That'll help lubricate it. It'll go in a little bit easier. And then once we push this up in position, I'll also run this new bolt in as well. This is a ball joint here, so you can actually just go ahead and torque it immediately, but this needs to be torqued at ride height. Yeah, sometimes steel bolts through aluminum, it gets all a little sticky, so I'm just putting a little bit of oil on the tip of the bolt. That should help lubricate the threads and move in a little bit nicer, which I can already tell it's moving better. And bolt's threading in nice, so that's good. This bolt threads directly in the control arm. There's no nut on the other side. That is good enough for now. It's going to hold everything in place. We'll go ahead and grab a pole jack and push this lower arm back up here to this ball joint. At home, a floor jack would do exactly the same as what we're doing now. with this pole jack. We're obviously using the lift, so a floor jack's not going to work for us, but a regular floor jack will do just the same. So you just want to get the control arm and the hole lined up with the ball joint like that. I'm going to go ahead and put a new locking nut along with this new bolt. I can go ahead and torque this bolt down now here at the ball joint to the knuckle. Because it's a ball joint, you can go ahead and torque it at full droop or maximum suspension travel, doesn't matter. For the bushing though on the shock, we do need to do that at ride height, so I'm going to have to go ahead and get the top of the shock mount secured first. So I'm going to leave that bolt loose for now, but I'm going to take care of this and get all of this situated underneath first. Torque spec on this outer bolt is going to be 165 Newton meters. So similar to the front, I need to basically push the suspension up against the body. Key note here is we got to make sure that the whole shock goes up against the bottom of the body. Obviously, the portion that we need sticking through is already there, but I just want to make sure it all goes lined up and it fits flush. So I'm just going to use a floor jack again up against the bottom of the suspension. And we'll go ahead and guide this into position. I'm compressing the shock a little bit now, so I know it's flush against the body of the car. Now we can go ahead and put the top mount on. So now we're going to go ahead and install our top portion of the shock mount. You'll notice here there's like a little ridge in the middle of it. That's going to go towards the bottom. The writing is going to come up towards the top. So with the shock mounts provided to you by AST, these are PowerFlex. We actually offer these individually on the site. But there's some writing on the upper lip here that's going to face up. This little notch below that's been cut out, that's going to face towards the bottom. And now the metal plate goes on top, and then our 19mm nut goes onto there. And so we're going to use a 9mm wrench as a counter hold and a 19mm wrench to compress our new shock mount. I am onto the threads on the shock shaft now with the nylock. Totally bottomed out. I'm going to go ahead and grab the damper adjuster and go ahead and throw that back on. But I've compressed that lower bushing, and I'm really happy with where that is right now. I mean, you can keep tightening this all day long, but there's really no point. Once the nylock is where it needs to be, we already have this shock compressed against the body. I don't want to smush or pancake that upper mount too much, and we have those two big washers underneath and on top, basically supporting both the lower and the upper shock mount here. So we're good to go on that front. Now we just go ahead and reinstall our little damper adjuster. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and put our damper adjuster back on the adjustment knob here. AST supplies an Allen key for this, so I'm gonna use the one that they gave me since it's the right size. I'm gonna set our rear shocks at 4, so I'm basically 6 at the front, 4 at the rear to start, and then I can fine tune from there as needed. So we're back underneath the car. I'm gonna go ahead and raise the suspension to ride height, so basically remove any of the droop, and then go ahead and torque this bolt here to 100 Newton meters. The point of that is to not preload the bushing. Rule of thumb is, if you have the car on stands and you're raising up the suspension, if you start to see weight lift off the pad, you're at ride height, so you could stop there. And this is 18mm. So our rear right corner is done. All I have to do is basically the exact same thing on the rear left. And then we go ahead and install the front sway bar links and make sure that's adjusted properly. And then we'll go ahead and lower the car down and see where we sit initially. We're gonna definitely make some adjustments. I don't think it's gonna be perfect right off the rip, but it'll be very interesting to see where it sits with everything set at the middle. So I went ahead and before we install these sway bar links, since they are adjustable, I went ahead and just put some anti-seize on the threads so that number one, they could be adjusted again in the future, and number two, hopefully don't seize up. Ever dealt with sway bar links, especially when they're not lubricated, they can sometimes be a misery to adjust again in the future. So, hopefully the anti-seize, the coating in there, will keep the threads relatively clean and keep moisture and other debris out. So it's just something you can do ahead of time, save yourself some misery later on. So I did both of them. All right, let's take a look at the car, see what we're working with here. So for now, I want to get the sway bar links in, and I want to get them where I'm not putting preload on the sway bar. So basically pulling up on the sway bar. Right now it's actually in a neutral rest position. I know that because basically the way that the sway bar is on this car, the bushings are clamped down. Now, one thing that you can take into account is the ride height of the suspension. The actual length of our damper body here is a little bit shorter than the factory one is. So by default, we're kind of in a position right now where if I were to load up the suspension, I'm gonna have to raise this collar up significantly. I'm gonna play around with this right now, but basically what I'm looking to do is install our adjustable link here in a way in which I'm not putting any additional tension on the sway bar. And I can show you kind of how that would look. If I change the length of the link, it's going to physically push or pull on the bar. And what I'm trying to do here is set this up so that the sway bar link is basically taut, and you know, I can basically push on it or pull on it and it won't really move around. But I don't want this thing so tight that it's actually pulling up on the bar, because that's adding additional preload. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure our gap here. I'm pretty happy where this is for the moment. I'm going to measure our gap here between the bottom thread of the body and where I have this adjuster set over here. And I'm basically just going to duplicate it on the other end. Another follow-up video that we're going to do is we're going to do a proper setup on this car. So set ride height, camber, toe, check caster, basically do the whole thing. Today is not that day. We're going to deal with that. What we really need to do is just get a baseline for the car, figure out where it needs to be improved, what other adjustments are required, and we'll kind of go from there. But right now, I've just kind of installed this where I'm not putting any additional load on the bar. And as the vehicle suspension moves, it's going to move the bar with it, which should keep it in a neutral position. So I'm relatively happy where that is right now. So like I said, these are adjustable. I'm gonna go ahead and clamp that down so it can't move anymore. So the set screws here, they're just 6mm Allens, and that just kind of clamps this assembly against the housing here of the shock. You don't need to make these insanely tight, just kind of clamp them down. You'll feel when they bottom out. Just basically pulling it together right now. So I'm happy where that is. I don't think that's gonna move. And you know, again, with an adjustable suspension like this, you're always going to have to fiddle around with it for the first period of time you install it. Ride height's going to change and settle, and you're just going to have to be prepared to make those adjustments. For this, we're going to put a washer on the back side and a washer on the front, and then our lock nut. And I'm going to raise the car up and make sure I do the same on the lower sway bar as well. Sway bar link ball joint. So I just adjusted it again to basically lower the sway bar back down. I can see that there was a little bit of preload on it. So this is kind of how it would be from the factory. The neutral position is at droop, but might change that in the future depending on what we do in terms of alignment stuff. So now I can go ahead and tighten that nut down. So we got a 5mm counter hold here and a 17mm wrench for the nut. And then basically I'm just going to duplicate this on the other side, basically install it, make sure that there's no load, also set the height of the mount to the same relative spot. We're also modeling it after how the factory sway bar tab was located. It was offset. So I want to go ahead and install this in a very similar fashion.
Are you tightening that one?
Huh?
Are you going to tighten that upper one?
Yeah. Just bring the jam nut down.
Just make mention of that. You want to make sure you bring your damn nuts down to lock these.
And then the other thing you're going to want to do is, you know, once you have your height on the adjustable link set, you're going to want to go ahead and lock that height adjustment with these jam nuts. Which conveniently are also not the, oh yeah, those 17s too. So those are 17s, and then you can use an adjustable wrench on the body of the adjustable link to get some torque into it. Now I'm just going to go ahead and tighten our top link mount, and then I'm also just going to go ahead and close our jam nuts here. All right, everything's installed. It's going to be interesting to see when the car gets dropped down where the ride height's going to be. Also kind of where the front camber is going to be. If I have to make adjustments on those camber plates, I'm going to probably end up doing that off camera, playing with it, but hopefully where I set it to initially, it'll be close enough that I can mess with a little bit later on. I also want it to let it settle as well, because ultimately, over a period of time, you're going to lose a little bit of ride height just from the vehicle settling. So we're going to see how it works out, but I can say this, everything went together really smoothly, everything fit the way that you would expect. All the adjustments on it are really nice. The clicks on the dampers, you can feel each adjustment. You know, even the way that the collars on the height adjusters move, everything feels really nice, kind of what you would expect from this type of kit. So throw the wheels back on, lower it down, see where we sit. All right, so that's how you would go about installing these AST 5100s on the E92 M3. Of course, this process is going to be the same for an E90 M3 or an E93 M3. Only variance really being if you have an EDC car, you're obviously going to have to disconnect some additional connectors, but overall the process is going to be the same. After you get these things installed, you're going to have to make some adjustments. Your initial ride height settings are probably going to be off, so you're going to need to go ahead back and forth and tweak those a little bit until you're right where you want to be. After that, let the car settle, and then make sure you get in alignment so you don't wear out your tires prematurely. Recommend specifically having this done by somebody who has a lot of experience corner balancing cars in order to really get the most out of the suspension. But other than that, hope you learned a lot. Hope you enjoyed the video. Obviously, this is something a little bit new in terms of the quality of the product that we installed. It's not just a basic replacement. This is a little bit more than that. We're going to have a video follow-up to this where we talk about properly setting this car up, corner balancing, setting ride heights, all that kind of stuff. So that's going to be a little more of an in-depth video. So look forward to that. Obviously, hit subscribe so you can see that when it comes out. Hit the like button if you like this video, and hit subscribe. We have a lot more videos on the way. And as always, we'll see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.